We're now recording. So good evening. My name's Lynn Henderson and I'm a Senior National Officer at the Public and Commercial Services Union, and I'm also the convener of the Reid Foundation, who are our hosts tonight. So this evening, we're going to have a bit of a discussion around women in unions today, and we've got some fantastic speakers lined up to lead off, and we'll be taking some questions at the end. The chat is open, and I've got two assistants here this evening. Mike and Dave will be monitoring the chat and putting in links, and can discuss with you some things in that chat. The Jimmy Reid Foundation itself, for anyone that's not aware of who we are, we'll put a link to our website in the chat, but we're a left-leaning think tank that continues the legacy of Jimmy's commitment to having good quality debate on the left. So we're also, our sister journal is the Scottish Left Review, which hopefully most of you will have seen. So what we're doing this evening then is ahead of International Women's Day. We thought we would bring together some women leaders in the trade union movement to talk about how we organise women workers in 2022, and not just leaving it to that, in that sense that why should women talk about women, but we thought it was really good to get the perspective of women who are in leading roles to talk about organising women workers. So we know that the average trade union member is stereotyped even still today as some kind of mythological kind of middle-aged white guy that's a blue-collar worker, probably swears like a trooper, probably West of Scotland man, and yet when you look at the data about where people are organised in the workplace, it's actually women that are more likely to be trade union members, even though our density is still relatively low. The sectors in which unions are most organised tend to be those in services and public sector areas where women are working. And yet, and still in unions like my own, where the majority of members are women, there still is a big issue about underrepresentation at all levels within unions. This is not a new challenge. This is a challenge that we've been facing for many years. And I think that's one that we need to continue to debate and discuss in a comradely fashion. So I want to introduce our speakers tonight. First of all, to say that one of our speakers has been unable to make it, and that's Christina McInerney, the Unison new General Secretary. But fortunately, Christina's been replaced by Lillian Macer, who is a formidable representative of Unison as the convener of Unison Scotland. I also have with me this evening my sister in arms, and that's Shabana Taj, who is the General Secretary of the Welsh TUC, and my other sister on the other arms, which is Ros Foye, who's the General Secretary of the Scottish TUC. All of these women have a fantastic background in grassroots workplace organising, in fighting bad bosses and encouraging participation and pushing against the agenda of where women are underrepresented within our movement. So one of the questions that we will be exploring is that if a woman's place is in a union, as a union leader, what are your priorities for strategies in organising women workers in 2022? So I'm going to put that to the speakers, but also outwards to all the sisters and brothers present here tonight. It's something I think we can all reflect on a bit. So that's enough from me for the moment. But I'm going to pass over to our first contributor, which is Lillian. So welcome, Lillian, floor's yours.
Thanks, Lynn. And firstly, colleagues, I do want to start by sending solidarity to the people of Ukraine. I think today we need to send our support to the unions that organise there, but also to the people who are currently suffering in the environment that they're in. I think we also need to condemn the appalling acts of aggression from Russia, and to send a message of solidarity to say that we stand side by side with workers in Ukraine. And I think we tonight need to send a clear message out to the global community that from this meeting tonight, the women and the trade union activists and the folks on this group send that solidarity. Lynn, I want to thank you and thank colleagues for the opportunity to address the meeting this evening, and also to sending apologies from Christina McAnee, the Unison General Secretary. Christina tested positive for COVID and is quite unwell, so hence she's not able to join the meeting this evening. And I think I speak for everyone on this call when I say that we send our best wishes to Christina, and we hope for a speedy recovery so that she can come back amongst us and start to give us the vision that she's got for Unison moving forward. So I'm also going to apologise to my Unison colleagues who thought they were going to hear Christina. I'm afraid you're stuck with me. So hopefully we can, I will articulate some of the points that Christina's doing in our Union for Women. But part of today I also want to perhaps share a wee bit of my own personal learning journey and my own story with colleagues on this call as well. So I'm as Lynn says, my name's Lillian Mason. I'm the convener for Unison Scotland. I'm a health worker. I work within NHS Lanarkshire. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. I'm a mother of 3 children, 3 grown-up children, and I'm also a grandmother. I've got 7 grandchildren. So I've got and know full well the role of women in the workplace and women in the movement in terms of that multitasking. This evening, whilst I share my own story, I also, as I said, want to talk about how we organise and support women, and just to pick up on that question around the strategy, the priorities for women in the movement. Within Unison, we have our membership is 3/4 female, so that equates to over 1 million women in Unison. So, and those 1 million women right now in the public services are working hard to keep the UK economy going. And it's important that we recognise the contribution of women in the economy, something sometimes people forget, but that is an important point. So in Unison, we are committed to ensuring that they get the support that they need to have their voices heard, and also to access leadership positions within our union. And when I take you through my own personal journey, you'll hear about the support and sometimes the challenges and barriers as well that are in place for women within our movement. But to that end, I think we need to pay tribute to Christina McAnee in terms of her leadership, because Christina has set about making sure that women's voices since her election last year have been heard in our movement and within our union. And our Equalities Unit within Unison has launched a project to increase the participation of low-paid women within the movement. Now, those low-paid women are concentrated, as we know, in jobs in the caring role and within our community, they're low-paid jobs, and in schools, in kitchens, in hospitals, and right across the country where we organise, Christina has made a commitment to hear those voices. And as part of that project, in October of last year, Unison brought together those low-paid women, cleaners, caterers, domestics, librarians, administrative support into our Unison Centre, just to hear the experience and to have that voice and that recognition for those women. And in building on those testimonies for those women, we want to develop and lift those voices into the heart of our decision making. Because we know and we recognise that we need our whole trade union to work as one. That's when we are strongest, that's when we are powerful, and that's when we deliver for members. When collectively as one, we have that strong support. Colleagues, over the last couple of years, I don't need to tell you how difficult and how challenging it's been, certainly as a health worker. I see day in and day out the pressures within the workplace throughout this pandemic. So I hope that governments across the UK see what we can see, that it is public sector workers that have carried this country through those last 2 very difficult years. And despite the rhetoric from the UK government that COVID pandemic is over, somehow it's disappeared, magicked away. We know as trade unions, and we've seen only too often the changeability of this virus and how it remains a threat within our workplaces and within our communities. Unison members have worked tirelessly over the last 2 years and have put their own health and well-being at risk, and at huge cost to themselves, to support, to make sure that everyone is kept safe within our communities, at their own health and well-being in terms of their own physical and mental health, and they are now absolutely exhausted. And we know that the current health and care system was going to be overwhelmed irrespective of COVID. So regardless of COVID, we knew this was going to happen. And as a health worker, I can tell you that the winter plans over the last numerous years have not delivered. They have absolutely failed to meet the demands. We do not have the capacity within the systems to cope with the demand at winter. We don't have the capacity right now to cope with the demand in summer. So at winter, it absolutely has failed miserably. And we know that COVID has really shone a light on this and brought it into sharper focus. COVID didn't create this. This was always going to happen, and it's just brought it into sharper focus the last couple of years of the pandemic. And at the front line are public sector workers who are made up of predominantly women and who have delivered and continue to deliver for this whole country throughout this pandemic. But when it comes to recognition, there are huge efforts. And when it comes to recognising the contribution of those women and of those public sector workers, we're told there isn't any money for a pay rise. Money can't be found for pay rises for public sector workers. And at the same time, we see the cost of living and crisis take hold, with inflation over 7%, with energy bills up by 60%, with benefits being cut and with national insurance set to rise by 1.25%. And on top of all of that, let's kick the health workers a bit more, because we're about to put an increased contributions on workers' pension. And that increase will see the lowest paid pay the most. And the highest paid, well, let's give them a rebate. The chief execs, your consultants, we'll give them a rebate. But see the low paid women, we're going to take more of them. And that's what this consultation in the Scottish Government and throughout the UK has asked Colin for. So we need to make a stop to that. And again, this is in the back of the big 6 energy companies saying £1 billion in profit. So they put that in their back pocket, and then they said, let's announce the big hikes and the increases in your energy bills. And it'll see your families suffer, and it'll see you having to make choices. And those choices between heating your homes, between keeping the lights on, feeding your families, and at the same time, the billions in profits go into the pockets of the rich, and we, the workers, are asked to pay for the crisis that we did not create. And that's absolutely appalling and outrageous, and we need to put a stop to that. And today, Unison Scotland have announced yet again that our lowest paid staff, the women in Glasgow, having to take industrial action to fight for pay equality. And to the women of Glasgow and to the women employed by Glasgow City Council, your equal pay fight is our equal pay fight. And we will join you again when you come to town to shut it down in this industrial action challenge with affiliates between Unison, Unite and the GMB. We will be there alongside our sisters in that fight. So that brings me on to my own journey, Lynn, and I just want to take a couple of minutes just to explain my own circumstances in that. So my own personal journey started as a catering assistant, one of those low-paid part-time workers in a hospital in Lanarkshire, and that was 37 years ago. And when I joined the NHS at the time, you joined the union, that's what you did. Things have changed, we know that, so we need to get back to that. That's exactly what happened then. And my own personal journey as an activist started around 2000 when they announced the PFI schemes in Lanarkshire, in both Hairmyres and in Wishaw General. So those two PFI schemes saw almost 600 low-paid, predominantly women, transferred to the private sector. And when they transferred me and my colleagues to the private sector, they took our pensions away. So they took our access to a public sector pension office, further making the inequalities within our system further exacerbated by that. So I became active around that time, and it was a woman called Bridget Hunter, who was a full-time officer for Unison, who said, "I like the cut of your jib. I think you could be a good rep for me. And I think you could help with it around this PFI nonsense." So I became active and I became a steward, but I quickly realised that I began to see and recognise the value and the power of education. So my journey started in 2000 and 2001 when I successfully completed Unison's Return to Learn programme. And I went on to do some TUC and STUC training through employment law, through health and safety, through an organising steward. And one of the first women's STUC women's weekends that I did was way back in the day. It was a presentation skills. And one of the tutors saw me staring at the space, thinking, rabbit in headlights, don't know what I'm doing, out my depth, what am I going to do? And came up and put her arm around me and said, no, you've got this. Agnes told me the Unite. You can do this. And that support from the sisters was absolutely amazing on that weekend. So I went on then to continue my learning journey. I went to university and did a diploma in health and safety. And in 2011, having left school with no formal qualifications, graduated from Caledonian University with a master's degree in human resource management. So that was my trade union and my employer at the time that supported me through that. So, and the women in the movement, it gave me the confidence to keep going. So as a steward, I have had many officers' positions in the union, but my very first was as the minute secretary. And I now realise that that had been a vacant position within the branch for a number of years because the role that undertook. But I did it and I quickly enjoyed it and recognised and grew through the ranks and became convener for Unison Scotland in 2011. And I've loved and absolutely been a privilege and a pleasure to represent Unison Scotland and to represent the women in Unison over those number of years. So have I seen challenges in my journey? Absolutely. Have I seen opportunities in my journey? Without a doubt. And do we need to do more for women to empower women within the movement? Absolutely, yes. So I'm delighted to say that Unison and Unison Scotland will appoint its first female Scottish secretary in Monday next week. Tracy Darling starts. So both Christina and Tracy have been a first for Unison, but by God, they'll not be the last. And I know that the women in Unison will make sure of that. So thanks very much, colleagues, for listening. I'm sorry I'm not Christina, for those that were wanting Christina, but I know that we'll send our very best wishes to Christina and also support the role that Christina's doing to empower women and to empower the women within our movement to absolutely take on the challenge, Lynn, that you've described.
Thank you very much, Lillian. That was really inspiring, and thank you for sharing your own personal journey. There's a lot I learned about you there, having known you a long time. But I think what stands out for me is that women helping other women get a hand up and confidence and encouraging each other. Bridget and Agnes doing that to you kind of helped you on your journey within the union. And never apologize for not being someone else. Pass on our very best wishes to Christina. I didn't realize why she hadn't come, because she must have written to Gregor, and he's not here tonight because he's not very well either. So pass on our very best, and I will send her a wee note. So thank you, and solidarity to the Glasgow women. I'll be just waiting to get back down there with them again and help them in that fight. So solidarity to your members. Lillian, thank you so much. So the next contribution is from Shavana Taj, and Shavana's here tonight all the way from Cardiff. Shavana is the first woman general secretary of the Welsh TUC. Prior to that, Shavana was an officer in PCS and was our Welsh secretary. So I know Shavana really well. We've worked together for a very long time, and I'm so proud of Shavana becoming the GS of the Wales TUC, and I can guarantee that she's kicking ass in there. So the floor is yours, Shavana.
Thank you, Lynn, and thanks for inviting me to for this evening. And I've been thinking about what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the TUC's finding in terms of BME women in particular, and some of the issues that they've been facing. And then if I've got enough time, I'll maybe add in a couple of other things as well. So you've just heard from Lillian in terms of the pandemic and how the UK government's response in particular has been so awful, and actually it's brought about a real serious threat to equality at work, and whether that's women's rights, Black workers' rights, LGBT rights, whether that's disability, it's been extremely difficult. But there is the particular case for BME women who have been facing and continue to face intersecting systems of oppression across their multiple identities, and that compounds one another. And these intersections include disability, they include gender identity, and they include sexual orientation, but they also include class, nationality, migration status, and of course, for some people, faith as well. So some of these structural inequalities also then of course exist across the labour market, in terms of the fact that actually BME women are then overrepresented in low-paid, insecure jobs, and therefore are at a much higher risk of being underemployed as well. So we know, for example, through some of the research that the TUC has done, whether that would be directly or whether that's through other organisations that they've worked with, that at least 1 in 8 BME women are in insecure work, compared to 1 in 16 white women. When it comes to low pay, 3 out of 5 BME women are in self-employment, are in low paid, compared to 2 out of 5 men. And then 1 in 8 BME women are underemployed, compared to 1 in 13 white men. So the combination of sexist and racist treatment that BME women in particular can face is then of course compounded by the other discrimination that they also face as well. And even when it comes to sexuality, again, 1 in 8 BME LGBT plus women have been seriously sexually assaulted or raped at work. When it comes to disability, almost half of all disabled BME women have been subjected to verbal abuse at work. And then in terms of age, over half of young BME women have said that they've been given harder or more difficult tasks than their peers, compared to 31% of BME female workers aged 35 and over. So this kind of, this distorting of the lens of stereotyping and prejudice when you look at race, gender and class, particularly that BME women are often seen through, means that their discrimination and their unfair treatment in work very much holds women, women who look like me, and other BME women, other Black women back. And that has a huge and detrimental and profound effect, of course, on their mental health and their well-being and their physical health as well. And we saw that during the pandemic. You know, the amount of times that I would personally hear back, as trade unionists, we would hear back the amount of anxiety that people were facing, the stress. And then, of course, when you have all of these factors, you then have all of the financial insecurity as well. So your take-home pay is impacted. You can't plan properly. You can't actually access credit. You can't secure mortgages or tenancy agreements. So and then of course you've got, you know, varying working hours, of course, also then impacts on family life. And that then makes it so much more difficult for you to organize childcare and the care of older relatives as well. So there are some real issues here, and the lack of workplace rights and the knowledge that, you know, hours can be reduced, particularly when it comes to temporary contracts, or the realities of what that looks like, you know, that really blights the lives of, you know, of ordinary people, ordinary working people, let alone BME women in particular. And we know as well during the pandemic that we were told continuously, the union movement was told continuously that Black workers in particular were being denied access to PPE and to appropriate risk assessments. And as one BME woman in particular, you know, she explained, you know, when asked to do visits to the vulnerable and elderly during the pandemic, that she wasn't actually, you know, being provided with the right information, even in terms of what that visit was going to, you know, intend, what she's going to be what she's going to be doing. And this whole issue around the unfair treatment factor, you know, we know that BME women have been singled out for harder or unpopular tasks at work compared to their white counterparts as well. And then, of course, when it comes to discrimination more widely, the fact that BME women have been reporting that they are unfairly passed over or denied a promotion at work, this again, during the pandemic, rose to nearly half of disabled BME women as well. And then, you know, when you have racism in the workplace and the experience of that, you know, what is considered to be just everyday, you know, or well, it's just a bit of banter and verbal abuse. When you have all of that, and you sit that alongside the fact that we have had over a decade of austerity, we've got the cost of living crisis very much in front of us already. We've had the cuts to a social security system that is completely broken. We've seen all the cuts to public services. So we know already that all of these factors have resulted in structural inequalities getting worse, people finding it really difficult to just do the day-to-day stuff. And when it comes to, you know, all of these factors, when you put all of this together, alongside the UK government's hostile environment, the policies that they have, specifically around when it comes to leave to remain, for example, lots of BME workers have not been able to access public funds. And they have had, you know, unscrupulous bosses that have been, you know, holding them back and doing not even paying minimum wage, let alone the real living wage. So all of these factors, you know, there is that triple jeopardy that BME women are facing, particularly because of precarious jobs and despite their added risks to health as well. But I think that one of the things that I wanted to also say today is that when you look like me, your experience as a activist and as a trade unionist can be quite different to that of people to that of people who don't look like me. And I think over the last couple of days, if people have paid enough attention to what's been said in the media, for example, over the awful situation that the war in Ukraine, the unjust war in Ukraine, but the way that some of this has been reported, for example, the talk about, you know, we feel for them because they look like us, because because they're civilized like us. And then, of course, you see people who are being turned away at the border because of the fact that they don't look like us, and because apparently they're not civilized like us. And all of a sudden, yet again, we see the ugly head of racism rearing its head. And it's back to, it's no longer about human compassion. It's about human compassion so long as they look like us, because they're seen as civilized like us. So the experience of multiple barriers and structural discrimination in the workplace, being seen as a second-class citizen or sometimes a third-class citizen, is very real, and it is really difficult, and it makes me angry. It's hurtful. It really is. And equally, if I can feel like that as somebody who is in the role that I'm in, and if I'm tired, then let alone what, other people who don't have the platform that I have, where I can work with other like-minded sisters who don't look like me, but are prepared to stand with me. And sometimes when I am tired, they are prepared to take the mic, and they are prepared to talk about these issues, is really important. So that there is that real, it's so important for the union movement to have a real protective safety net of sisterhood, because that level of responsibility and having that weight of your shoulders, you do really have to find that inner strength, and that you have to have that level of acceptance, and you have to have that level of care to one another, and understand that we are not here simply just to talk about racism during when there's a Stand Up to Racism demonstration, for example, or when it's Black History Month that we have people who look like me asked to come and speak. But actually, we are talking about all of the issues, all of the real important issues that affect working people, that must be part and parcel of our day-to-day work when it comes to collectively bargaining and building our strength in the workplace, and making sure that our union movement, is aware of these issues, but is also very aware of the power dynamics, and is also very aware of the privileges that race actually brings with it as well. Now, this is not about, this is for me never a case of pitting one type of inequality over another, but it is about understanding how all of these issues intersect, but also how can we all work together. And, for me, I have been very privileged to come across some amazing women and men in the movement, amazing people in the movement who have always looked after me and always had that protective arm around me. But when we put out statements, when we are talking about what is happening in other parts of the world, and we see that something is not right, particularly when we have, as the TUC, when the TUC has a race task force, we can't just say we're going to address those issues when the task force meets. We have a responsibility to talk about these issues at that given moment in time, and not just talk about it because there's people protesting because Black Lives Matter all of a sudden. It should matter every single day. Those inequalities haven't gone away just because we put out a statement or we did a video or we waved a couple of flags. Those things it doesn't work like that. We know that we have to keep doing the work on a regular basis. So I'm going to leave it there, Lynn, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Shavana. You may have noticed that I've become the STUC. My laptop kind of died during your contribution there, but it's still me. Luckily, the STUC's laptop was also on at the same time. So Shavana, That's an incredibly moving story that you've told us. And I think that the pride that we have in you being the leader, the General Secretary of the Welsh TUC, is that you are now putting your arm around people in the way that you've described, that that women and men have put their arm around you to bring you to where you are today. And you're a fantastic advocate for our movement in Wales, and it's sort of, you know, we see up here in Scotland and just how much you have transformed the profile of the TUC in Wales. So thank you so much for your contribution. Our third and final kind of formal contribution of the evening then is from our sister Ros Foye, and Ros is the General Secretary of the Scottish TUC, and has a long and dynamic history within our movement as well. So over to you, Ros.
Thanks very much, Lynn. And if I can just start by apologising if my voice goes. I've actually spent the last 5 days away with 7 of my sisters on a 50th birthday weekend, and lots of singing took place, lots of whooping, and most importantly lots of laughter took place, but it has left my throat a little bit the worse for wear. I'm sure it was nothing to do with the alcohol at all. It was the laughter. That's what I'm putting it down to. But I'm really, really pleased to be here today, and I'd like to thank the Reid Foundation for inviting me to be here today. I have worked with a lot of different unions, and I was really interested in the sort of questions that were thrown up about, you know, if a woman's place is in her union, what more can we be doing to organise women? And there is no doubt that although we are, you know, a very different trade union movement from the one we were, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And I think we have, to a massive extent, broken the stereotype. You know, at the end of the day, I think one of the first things, and it's a bit like, you know, Shavana was reflecting on, and also Lillian when she was talking about levels of representation, I think we need to acknowledge that, you know, inside the trade union movement, we don't have a perfect culture of equality. Trade unions, just like other parts of society, can be just as discriminatory, just as misogynistic, and also, you know, those different intersectional issues really do matter and do come into play. So, you know, we do see sexual harassment inside trade unions. We do see and have seen discrimination, and we've certainly seen, you know, racism. We've seen victimisation of gay women, disabled women. All of these things, you know, have happened, and they've happened inside our movement. And you know, I don't think we can afford to be complacent or superior, or, you know, think that just because we hold conferences, have training sessions and go on demos and marches against racism, that means that we are perfect or beyond reproach. I still feel that it is, it's tough out there for a lot of women, and I think there are reasons why you know, some women aren't putting themselves forward for positions and haven't put themselves you know, into the limelight, and you know, there still is in some parts of our movement an unacceptable macho culture. And I would like to start by I'd like to actually pay tribute to Lynn Henderson, our chair tonight, because Lynn actually started a very important campaign inside the trade union movement called Step Aside Brother, and I know that campaign inspired many women to put themselves forward for positions that they might otherwise not have considered doing, not least myself, because, you know, I was a great proponent of the campaign. I encouraged lots of my sisters to go for things, and I did get to the point where, You know, it's not just about step aside brother, and step aside brother wasn't anti-men, as a lot of men tried to accuse Lynn and others of it being. It was about saying to men who maybe held 5 or 6 positions inside the trade union movement, look, you know, have you thought about maybe giving up 1 or 2 of those positions and asking a sister to do it, and giving them a chance to step forward and allowing them to develop, and, you know, using your energies to bring forward a more diverse team of representation within your workplace. And, you know, we know that there is a disproportionately over-representation of men when you look at the number of members, you know, and the breakdown of members in unions. So, you know, I think that was a very legitimate thing to do. But I also think there was a responsibility on women at all levels to also challenge themselves and say to themselves, right, it's time to step forward, sister. And that's certainly, you know, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here today doing this job if it wasn't for Lynn and other sisters and their encouragement of myself as a woman trade unionist, to push myself that bit further, to step, you know, to try and go for a job that was a leadership role at a different level from the level that I was operating at. And I think for so many women, it is a case of we actually do need to tap women on the shoulder and give them a wee push sometimes. You know, imposter syndrome, sorry, you know, can be real. It can be real for all of us. There are days when I just thank my lucky stars in some ways that COVID happened. You know, we went into the COVID pandemic the same week as I started in my new role, because otherwise I think I might have overthought it an awful lot and had an absolute panic attack. But because there was a crisis on, you just had to throw your worry out the window and get on with it and jump in there and not worry about it, and do your best in the circumstances that were there. And that's what I've tried to do. But I guess the point I'm making is, you know, sometimes it's good. I certainly think it's important. It's not just good, it's important for women who are at the levels that I'm maybe operating at now to actually share some of our own vulnerabilities, and the fact that we still need a tap on the shoulder sometimes, that we get embarrassed and scared, and that we are vulnerable too, that we have, you know, lots and lots of stresses and responsibilities, that we don't ever feel we've prepared enough or done a good enough job half the time. And, you know, that's it kind of goes with the territory, but I think we can all buy into that and identify with it. And, you know, I guess if I can do what I'm doing now, then there's probably loads of people sitting on this call that could do it at least as good as I can. And so I would encourage all of you, you know, it's that thing about, it's not just step aside brother, and that is important, but it's also, we need to also challenge ourselves and keep pushing ourselves forward, and take that step forward, sisters, into whatever level you're operating at. Don't be afraid to push yourself that wee bit further, because you might be surprised that you can actually do it, and give the brothers a good run for their money. So just, you know, thinking about some of those elements really, when we talk about, you know, what unions are like, there are more women in, you know, senior leadership roles now within trade unions. There are a lot of, you know, when I look round the General Council, I used to sit in the General Council over 20 years ago as a youth rep, actually, or from the youth committee on the General Council of the STUC. And in those days, all the Scottish secretaries were, without exception, men. Most of the full-time officials that sat on the General Council were men. And what you had were a few women in particular women's seats. Now, actually, we have, I think, more women than men sitting on the General Council in the last couple of years for the first time. And what's really interesting is that an awful lot of those women are sitting there as the leader of their union in Scotland. And that's a really, really good thing to see, that we have that level of diversity now. And I think it will begin to, you know, make a difference. There are definitely more role models out there. But I would also say that, you know, as well as just challenge yourself in terms of unions culture and models, we also need to look at unions as employers. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for the fact that my partner, who's also a union official, actually worked for a more enlightened union for the one I used to work for, because in the union I used to work for, they didn't think you could be an officer and be a part-time worker. They didn't think that was possible. So, you know, having 2 kids that we had, if my partner hadn't been able to take a back seat and go part-time, I don't think I would have, you know, risen through the ranks of my organisation and been able to take on the roles that I took on. And it wasn't an option for me to do that within that particular organisation. So I also think that unions as employers need to walk the walk and make sure that their practices are inclusive and allow women to be represented at all levels. And I mean, for me, the most important leadership roles inside our movement are the shop steward roles. It's your frontline representatives. People join a union because of the rep that operates in their workplace. It's not the general secretary that's their leader. Most of them don't know who the general secretary is, but they know who their rep is. And they're more likely to join the union if that rep is someone who's relevant, who really speaks for them, who they can identify with and buy into, and who's out there and talking to people. So, you know, for me, us making every effort we can to get women involved in workplaces as reps and really support that process, and, you know, put our resources into organising and into employing, because for me, organising is a craft. So, you know, employing and training people to take on that organising role and really go in and develop people and find who the natural leaders are in that workplace, because women actually are fantastic natural leaders. They usually tend to be the people that organise all the birthday parties, that organise all the social events, that, you know, they organise so many things in life at community level and at workplace level. But, you know, and they have all the exact skills that you're looking for in someone to be a really great, you know, leader within the union at that workplace level. And yet often they don't even realise that they've got the skills that we're actually looking for. And as I said, wouldn't be inclined to be the ones who put themselves forward. So I think, you know, that's what we really need to work on, is going out and finding those natural leaders in our workplaces, the people who already have everybody's phone number and address and organise every work night out and everything else, because they're the people who actually are our union builders. They're the ones that are going to movement build for us as we move forward. And it is really, really important that we take that movement building piece seriously, and that we really you know, get on with that side of things. You know, we have a really, really big issue, and if we don't start to take on the roles that women do, and I think Lillian covered it really well when she talked about, you know, the number of the women that have been the ones that have been keeping our society going through this pandemic, the public sector workers, the key workers, and, you know, there's over 1 million key workers here in Scotland. The vast majority of those workers are women, and most of them earn under £10 an hour. And, you know, if you look at some of those kind of roles where people are earning that kind of rate, you're talking about 82% of residential carers and home carers being women. You're talking about 77% of cleaners being women, 76% of retail cashiers, 96% of nursery nurses and assistants. So these are the sorts of roles in areas where women absolutely dominate the workforce, but they also happen to be the areas where, you know, many of those workers are not in organised workplaces, and we really need to, you know, get out there and do a job of work to get those workers organised. And for me, you know, it's going to be, you know, like our equal pay women in Glasgow that are balloting at the moment, that where the real battlegrounds of the future are going to be. It's going to be those unorganised workers in the care sector. It's going to be our workers who work in areas like hospitality and those parts of retail that are not organised, and distribution, etc. You know, that's where we're really going to have to have the battles of the future, and really make sure that people start to get pay equality and pay justice, because women's work is undervalued. And the only way we're going to be able to do something about that is if we get out there and we reach out and organise those women. And, you know, for me, it's never a bad idea to go and ask a busy woman to do something if you want something done, because we're used to multitasking, we're used to running our families and our work and everything else to take that forward. So, you know, we have a lot of major challenges ahead, but I do feel that unions are starting to wake up, that this is the future, and that they need to take the struggles that women workers are facing far more seriously and put far more investment into that. When you look at, you know, what areas of the workforce, you know, as we're moving to a net zero economy and towards more green jobs like care jobs are actually part of a green sustainable infrastructure. These will be important jobs. They're also jobs that are very, very hard to replace by automation and digitalisation, because that human touch, that human element is something that you can't replicate. So, you know, that is where the battlegrounds of the future lie. There's no shortcuts to it. We need to get in there. We need to listen to people. We need to do deep organising, and that takes a lot of resources. So there needs to be a political will there for our movement to get in and organise those workers. But I'll tell you something, when you get women workers organised, they will roar like lions, and they will make the changes we need to see for workers happen. So I'll leave it there to Chair. Happy to listen and hear what our sisters have to say in the less formal part of the contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ros. Another brilliant contribution, and some of the things that you've highlighted about the truth and honesty of how much misogyny and discrimination still exists today within our movement, as well as within the wider workplaces and society, is something that trade unionists, we all need to confront and take forward. You know, we all know the stories that women have suffered within our movement, and it's completely unacceptable. And we need to continue to challenge and root out those terrible practices and behaviours within our movement, and take responsibility for challenging that as well. So that was a you know, really glad that you raised that point. And thank you very much for referencing Step Aside, Brother. I know that I did get some stick for actually asking men to take the initiative and to choose the women that was going to succeed them. And I think it was a tongue-in-cheek approach that I took to actually opening up debates that kind of continue to be debated in the movement today. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about Step Aside, Brother. So we've covered the situation in Ukraine, the impact that that's having on workers here in the UK, and the impact that's having on our workers in the Black and ethnic minority community as well. The way that white Europeans are seen as being more deserving of aid and entry into the country. That's playing out in workplaces across the country. The strong impact that discrimination and intersectional discrimination has on workers and trade unionists is really kind of massively underreported and not talked about widely enough in our movement. And the stuff that Lillian started from about the pandemic and workers that were deemed key workers delivering, and often being, you know, the lowest paid women workers and some of the most vulnerable members, and yet there's little thanks, and yet there's a cost of living crisis, and that those our members are you know, are facing that the deepest. So there's a lot of territory covered within these contributions so far. There's some questions in the chat that you've probably all been looking at. I think I want to invite Jennifer McCary to come in, because she raises a question about the broadening out the equal pay campaign beyond Glasgow. And it's just, well, she puts a very kind of precise question in there. It's probably worth just bringing her in to say something about that. Can we unmute Jen? I think we're in control of your your volume.
Yep, that's me. Hi sisters, thank you so much for your contributions. It was just great to take a bit of time and space out to note where we've came in the movement in Scotland, and it is a tremendous journey. And I know that there's lots of people on this call tonight who've been part of that. And I suppose my question was about, you know, now that we're starting to see changes in power in terms of women leading unions in Scotland, and that's long overdue and well deserved for the women in those positions. How do we start to actually shift the agenda so that we're moving some of our resources and our industrial targets to the work that women do and the problems that women face in the workplace? And I know that that work is really, you know, there's lots of layers to it, and that lots of women that are here tonight, and particularly the people that are speaking, have been tackling those issues. But it would seem that on the issue of equal pay, we've got a brilliant example in Glasgow of pursuing, you know, low pay through tackling the issue of equal pay, and actually bringing the power of the union by women workers and male workers standing together, united, so that we get industrial power to push for a victory that lifts low pay for everybody. And it seems like such a fantastic opportunity for people to start looking in their own workplaces for equal pay issues, so that they can think about using that tool of the legal and industrial muscle to champion the issue of equal pay, to tackle the issue of low pay. But I think perhaps we've seen slow progress across Scotland, not just in the public sector unions, but in every union, and actually taking up the issue of equal pay for their members. So I suppose in a space like this, it's good to be a wee bit controversial, and that's what I hope to do, so that we can start a bit of a debate on how we do that a bit better.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And I'm going to open to the panel in reverse order to come back on that point. So I'll start with Rose.
Okay, I agree. I think it's something that we certainly need to examine, how we can open up some of those areas. I certainly think that the STUC can play a role in helping to support that, and this is something that we've certainly discussed, as Jennifer knows, at General Council meetings. But I do also think that affiliates having a responsibility there as well to actually sit down together. And you know, it is a problem, that there is a problem. I remember in an affiliate that I used to work with, you know, women in the banking sector being quite exercised that whenever there was a few hundred redundancies in some parts of the union, seemed like a disaster, and they were making the point, well, we've had thousands in our area, where's the resource for our campaign? You know, so this is something that I think we've actually just got to get stuck in there at lay levels on committees where these decisions are made. We're democratic organisations and trade unions, and you know, the debates need to be had, you know, within the STUC. Those debates take place at General Council and on the floor of Congress and in our women's conference and committees, etc. But within our own affiliates at every level, there are debates taking place, there are decisions being made about where campaign resources are directed. And I think, you know, women need to get their elbows out and start making some of those arguments and bringing that debate and demanding those resources for the areas that they belong to. So, I pay tribute to the work that Unison's doing to get more low-paid women involved in its structures, because step one to getting the resources you need is actually understanding how the machine works and how you get your hands on those resources. So, you know, maybe that could be the subject to some future Women's Weekend schools for the STUC, as well as the public speaking skills. It's also the how do you move, you know, how do you win the resources for your campaign type skills.
Thank you, Ros. And Shavana?
Yeah, I think that now that you know, we've been talking about Step Aside Brother and the impact that that's had. So we know that there are more women on committees and structures, but there's, even where you don't have as many women, or you can't tip the balance in your favor, there's often some seats that are, you know, are vacant and haven't been taken up. So it is about strategically kind of like organizing yourselves as well at a local and regional level, and making a decision as to who is going to go for that seat. You also have to remember that you can get co-opted onto committees as well, particularly decision-making bodies. So there's that opportunity. And I think that it would be really interesting to see actually sectorally in Scotland, and kind of maybe doing the comparison with Wales as well, actually, to see where the gaps are. And where the power lies as well within those workplaces. So, you know, how many men versus women activists have we got? What does the membership makeup look like? And actually, over the last 5 years, where we have decided to take up disputes, and you know, and have we actually won? Because sometimes, to be honest with you, I've seen some disputes that haven't been as big as, for example, the equal pay dispute in Scotland, that they've had more attention given to them at a national level than something as big as this. And, you know, is it a case of, you know, maybe this is just me being, you know, a little bit messy, but is it a case of, well, we can't, you know, we can't really highlight this dispute because it's a dispute that was, you know, run by and won by women? Is it a case of that all of a sudden they're going to want to, you know, be in their driving seat in other spaces as well? It could well be. There could well be some of that going on. But there are some, you know, interesting campaigns I've seen that have come out of Scotland. In Unite, for example, in some of the hospitality sector, the Better Than Zero campaigns, the Get Home Safely campaign as well. I think that's a really interesting campaign. That's been really good, a really good way to encourage people to join the trade union and get active as well. So it is about trying to find a hook sometimes, and look at, it might not be necessarily pay is the most important, you know, campaign for that workforce at that moment in time, but it may well become the one. So it isn't necessarily just always about pay, but there are lots of other factors as well.
Thank you, Shavana. And Lillian?
So I think just to add to what colleagues have said, absolutely, totally agree and support. But we need to get the voices of the women in the movement. And until we get those voices at those levels within our union, within the decision making, I think we will struggle. And no matter how hard we try, we will always be pushed back and pushed down. So we need to empower, we need to organise, and we need to generate the voices of the women who operate within those areas, who work within those areas, to be the voices that take forward those issues. I think that just to refer back to the commitment from Christina McInerney around engaging and empowering our low-paid members, that's a start. It is a start of where we want to be, and I think it's a really good start because we put the spotlight there and we put the resources there, and we empower the women then to take forward the issues. And Shavana's right about encouraging women. We did a piece of work some time ago with school workers and school caterers and cleaners, and particularly in the private sector. And the companies that we targeted, some of the private sector companies, terrible companies. And when we asked them, what do you want? We expected people to say more pay. They said they wanted a higher quality of food for the children, was the first thing. Then they said they wanted crockery and cutlery so that they could feed the children, and that was important to them. And thirdly, it was about dignity and respect for themselves. But we got to pay in the end because we organised the campaigns that were important, as you say, Savannah, to the members on the ground, and they led the campaigns. But the snowball effect was that pay became the priority once those other hugely important areas were dealt with. So I think in terms of empowering, hearing the voices, but having that opportunity to have women in leadership positions within our union is hugely important. And I'm hugely excited in relation to Unison. I think we've got strong, articulate women coming on board with Christina and Tracy and others. And particularly in Scotland, we will be looking to see what next for us as women in this movement.
Thanks, Lillian, and thank you all three. We are going to finish at by 8:30. There's a couple of questions in the chat, and if hopefully if Kathy and Carol don't mind, I'm going to just ask the panelists to respond to, because I think you both made some really great points, Kathy, about trying to organise in a sector like social care, where there's a high turnover of women workers, and real difficulties in retaining union membership when you're organising a sector like that. And then Carol raises a really interesting point about women's human rights in the workplace. So I'm going to kind of say, if you want to answer, kind of come in on either or both of those points. And I'll start with Shavana first this time, just to mix it up a bit, if you want to come in on these. And if we have time, I might take another question. We'll see how we go. Okay, so let's start with Shavana, and then it'll be Lillian, and then it'll be Rose. Okay.
Thanks, Lynn. So really interesting questions and lots of different comments coming up. So and they're still coming, so that's great. I think that it is important for us to talk about human rights, because human rights, more often than not, workers' rights. And so we should definitely be talking about them in the workplace, because some of the private, the fact that we are finally talking about menopause in the workplace is huge, right? And the fact that we can talk about these things and that we actually are able to educate men in the workplace about some of the issues that they may not personally be facing, but others that they know are facing, including some of the people that they work with are facing, in itself, I think is almost like is groundbreaking, right, for the union movement. These are big things that we are doing. So that in itself is hugely progressive. That's like a big move from where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago even. Then for us to be talking about other issues like period dignity, and again, making that a workplace issue, because it is a workplace issue, again, has that impact then, of course, in terms of how young girls can access support if they need it, if they need sanitary towels, etc., in schools as well. And that in itself has then had that kind of like wider impact. So, and we've seen those changes then come about, not only in workplaces, but also in communities and in other spaces of education, for example. So I think that it is about us taking control of our collective bargaining agenda and not just sticking to the things that we are told are bread and butter issues of the union movement, because these are bread and butter issues of the union movement. We should be setting the agenda. We don't have to go with what has always been the case, or what, because it may well have been that, men were just too embarrassed to talk about these things. But now that we are having these conversations and we're talking about these things more openly, and we are creating safe spaces and inclusive spaces for people to be able to talk, and we're not always going to agree on absolutely everything, but I think that as a union movement, as trade unionists, we always do our best to operate on the basis of dignity and respect. And I think that so long as we remember that, I think that we can always find a middle ground and stick together and keep fighting for, you know, lots of improvements. Because I think that, like I say, for me, the cost of living crisis, we already saw it with the decade of austerity. It was women that bore the, you know, bore the brunt of the cuts and the crisis and the pandemic and the aftermath of all of that. So we are going to have to keep organising and keep building, but we are going to have to ensure that we remain very open and very honest, and also make space for younger women to come forward. It is so important for us to not just section people off according to which category we believe that they fall into.
Thanks, Shavana. Lillian?
So one of the priorities for Unison Scotland, and has been a priority for a number of years, is around social care and around organising and supporting the workers within social care, but also turning the focus on the service and the service that's delivered, and the rights-based approach that was articulated in the consultation and the outcome from the failure review is something that we are absolutely signed up to. And in that, I think we need to use all of the tools at our disposal, including the Fairer Scotland duty in Scotland, to start to challenge and push back on the inequalities that exist within our society, in particular the decisions that are made by boards, by councils, again, significant, predominantly men within those environments, and those decisions that impact on communities. And when I say that, I also mean the workers within those communities. So I think that Carol's question around human rights is absolutely fundamental in terms of how we should be campaigning, organising and pushing back on some of the decisions that have been made, using the tools at our disposal, making sure and holding people to account to make sure that whenever decisions are made, they're made for the right reason, and that the rights-based approach is front and centre to that. Our within Unison and certainly Unison Scotland, we've created a very new committee, one of our newest committees within our structure, and for our social care workers, and that's to give those workers that absolute worker voice, because we recognise that there was a democratic deficit within our structures that didn't have the voices of social care workers. So now we're on a journey with this committee, we're on a journey with our existing committees, and to make sure that people don't feel threatened or intimidated by this new committee, but welcome and value the contributions. So I think we're in a better place, certainly in Unison Scotland, to take forward the rights-based approach to organising within social care, and absolutely utilising and using every tool in our toolbox to make sure that we hold those that make those decisions absolute account.
Thank you, Lillian. And Rose?
Yeah, there's a few things in there. I mean, I've just been reflecting on the issue of human rights, and you know, the whole equal pay debate for me is around human rights. I was actually reflecting that whole thing around dignity. One of the most interesting organising campaigns I was ever involved in, that involved a lot of women workers, was a campaign in a meat factory down in Dumfries and Galloway. And the issue was about the fact they had to clock out to go for a pee. And that was, you know, for the minute they clocked out, they then had to go down a corridor, etc., get all stripped out of their protective gear because they're working with food, go for the toilet, then get back into their kit, if you know what I mean, get all washed up, make sure they were clean, and get back on the shop floor, and they were paying to do that. And it became clear that this actually was disproportionately impacting on women because, you know, particularly at certain times of the month, etc., we at times have to go to the toilet more frequently. If you were pregnant, etc., there were many reasons why women might have to do that. And we managed to run a very successful and very public campaign around that. But you know, the reality was some of these women were having to come and work in nappies so that they weren't losing too much. These were already very low paid workers, and for me, you know, there is a human right to actually, you know, have access to hygiene and be able to go to the toilet when you need to go to the toilet. You know, so these things I think are just extremely important, and when we're thinking about, you know, how we're organising workers' human rights is a key part of the bargaining agenda, and that sense of dignity is so important to people. And you're right, sometimes it does come above pay, you know, in terms of, you know, how people are being treated as the important issue. The other thing, just talking about how hard it is to organise in some particular areas. I mean, the best people that will tell you how to organise in a difficult area is the workforce themselves. And usually they are organised to a certain extent. There are networks there. So, you know, we really need to make sure that we're listening properly to the workers themselves. And, you know, if that involves, you know, going to people's doors and having small conversations in people's houses where they invite a couple of pals they know that also work there. You know, I've seen many a great organising campaign get built very slowly on the foundation of, you know, the friends networks that already exist within a workplace. And, you know, things like WhatsApp, etc., are a great help nowadays. I've really been inspired by some of the stuff that I've seen around the ballots around equal pay. You know, I thought the GMB's women karaoke team on tour all around Glasgow and all those different districts and areas was really fantastic. And you know, I really think that, you know, we've actually started to build up quite a lot of expertise about how you can organise groups of workers that are really hard to reach, like home carers, where people really are, you know, perhaps getting directed by an app to where their next job is and where they've to go. And it is those social networks that the workers themselves have that we have to follow when we're trying to organise those workers. So what I've learned is no matter how hard an organising campaign looks at the beginning, if you listen to the workers themselves, you can always find a way. So I think we just have to keep listening to the women workers themselves and, you know, realise that we have to put the right amount of resources in to get these things off the ground. But I think once we build those structures and build that strength and that power, those women will never let it go, and they'll be, you know, very doughty fighters in the campaign to get themselves pay justice.
Thank you, Ros, and thanks to all three of you. I'm probably going to call it quits there. There's a couple of announcements that I want to make about future events, but I want to thank Ros, Shavana and Lillian for a really inspiring evening. And if we were all together, I'd want to just give you all a hug, but I can't, but it's a kind of a virtual hug. Things I want to announce: if you liked tonight, then there's another event coming up that the STUC is having, an International Women's Day event around the issue of sexual harassment called Silence is Compliance, Sexual Harassment at Work in Scotland. And there's a fantastic lineup of speakers, and that's taking place on Monday, the 7th of March at 6 p.m. Details will be on the STUC website, so we'll look out for that. Other things I just want to mention, as the part of the Jimmy Reid Foundation, if people will know that we're in the middle of the 50th anniversary of the UCS working, from June 1971 to October 1973. So we're having a very long series of celebrations. It's a series of events that are still to take place that we're planning. So keep looking at our website. But there is something coming up very soon. I don't have a fashioned flyer here. There's a play by Townsend Theatre that's touring throughout the Britain at the moment. But it's going to be in Clydebank on Saturday the 12th of March, called Yes, Yes, UCS, and the play's about two women workers at UCS and the part they played in the working, and how they got inspired and involved in the union. So I think that's a really kind of topical subject for us. It's going to be in Clydebank on the 12th of March, and then it's in Irvine on the 22nd, Dalbeattie 23rd, and then in North Edinburgh on the 27th. So they can be, again, it can be found online. So I would encourage people to go along to that play. So on that kind of final note, again, I just thank once again everyone that's participated in this meeting. And I think there's a really lovely quote in the chat from David, who talks about this is a really inspiring meeting and challenge. Where is it? Can't see it now, but he was talking about how this is a lovely event, and it's something that's really needed to inspire women leaders of the future. And I think that you've all done that by sharing your own experiences, but also being brave to call out within our own movement things that we need to continue to challenge. So I want to thank everybody for coming along tonight. We'll do more of these, and we'll do some of them in person some very time soon. So have a lovely rest of the evening, everyone, and thanks for making it such a nice event. And we'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
I can only apologise about my technical problems.
Speak to you soon, Lynn. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Cheers, Ross.
I'll phone you soon, Spanner.
Cheers.